Alright, we're going to start a build of the new Outrage Fusion 50 kit. Very nice looking kit right here. So right now we're just going to show what we've got in the box here. We open this up. Start out, we've got a nice little manual here. All set and ready to go. Pretty simple layout. Close to, if you're used to the Align manuals, it's very similar, except less lost in translation, I would say. Makes much more sense if you're actually reading it in plain English. Get a nice little Outrage towel, so that's awesome. We'll have a nice little new background here. Everything's separated very nice here. Let's see what we've got here. Looks like we've got, all the long stuff like the tail. There's no blades included. I'm going to use some Align 600mm blades, but the torque tubes, the tail boom supports, all the bearings and everything that goes with that. This side is pretty nice. I like the way this is packed up. It's got everything. Main bag 5 and main bag 8. It says it's 5 and 6mm shaft ready. It's got the pinions for the 5mm. So I made sure I purchased separately the 6mm. I've got a 13 tooth pinion set up that I'm going to go for. So I purchased those separately. If you've got a 5mm shaft, you've already got all the pinions that you need. Looks like it's got a lot of the tail stuff, motor mount, rear servo mount, the main bearing blocks, a couple different things in here wrapped up really nice. And then there's this other part, we've got front torque tubes. Looks like a lot of stuff is pre-assembled, but as always, we're going to take everything out and make sure we've got it cleaned and thread locked. Got a couple different types of dampeners, probably a 3D and an FC3 style. All the blade grips, mixing arms, tail sliders, paddles, everything you need in here. Looks like this kit actually is really versatile. You can set it up for a 3D sort of style, or if you want to get it to an F3C sort of smooth flying style, you can do that. I'm going to set it up more aggressive on the 3D side. The last little box we've got in here. This is 5mm and 6mm ready. Looks like we've got a little blade holder. And we'll have that ready to go. This beautiful canopy. I just love this canopy that they include with it. Look at that, nice little can of mod. This thing is just beautiful. So we'll put that to the side. Obviously we won't be doing anything with it for a little bit. So we'll just set it to the side and admire it for a while. Okay, and here we've got the main gear. Looks like most of that's set up. And then we'll take it apart. Skids, the battery mounts, the frame, and some of the hardware in here. So everything's separated. We'll go in and we'll follow the manual step by step and make sure we've got it all right. As always with the frames, we've got carbon fiber conducts. We're going to make sure we go through that with some small grit sandpaper and get all the edges and make sure, because carbon conducts, that we're going to get anything that might have wires running through it, make sure we get that stuff cleaned up and looking nice. So it's a really nice layout. We're just going to follow up with the manual as always. Start with step 1, and looks like this will be a fun and exciting build. I really like this layout. The way they've got everything set up in trays, sort of. It really kind of makes it a lot easier to organize things. So here we go. Rage Fusion 50 kit. For the motor, I'm going to be using a Scorpion, and I will be using some line servos. We've got the Scorpion 40, 35, 560. I'm going to do a 12 cell setup. And this should be more than enough power to get this thing rocking. So, on to the build of the Outrage Fusion 50. As it shows in the first step here, we're going to get this head block started. All we have to do is take the seesaw and the hardware and make sure we put them, basically it says right here on the outside it's going to be more stable FC3 style flying. On the inside it's going to be more advanced and quicker control. So middle would be, you know, middle range. So stable, or a little less stable on the inside, more stable on the outside. I'm going to put it on the inside. I want a more stable setup, but do whatever's working for you. If you're kind of a beginner, go on the outside, or if you're just doing sports flyer, FC3 or F3C style flying, sorry, go on the outside. Most of this is already done in the factory with all the bearings and everything. The first hardware part, it says it's going to be in bag 1A, but actually the layout that we've got here, it's in these front parts. We've got the seesaw on here and the main center block in the middle there, and the hardware is also packed up with it. So grab this hardware, make sure you're using blue medium strength thread lock because you're going metal into metal. We're going to follow this. We're going to put the ball links on here, and that's pretty much all you have to do for this stage. Just get this cap screw in here and ready to go so that we can put it through the seesaw. So we're going to have the seesaw ready, put it through here, put the screw through the seesaw here in the middle, and then make sure you put the double ball links on here on the end. So we're going to get that part done, and then we'll move on here to the next step. Okay, before you move too far with your setup and the next steps, you want to make sure you figure out what kind of setup you want, whether you want the beginner setup, the intermediate, or the advanced. I'm going to go for the advanced. So it lays out basically here which linkage rods control all of the head setup and how sensitive it is. So it says here linkage rod B, it's this one here between the lower mixing arm and the flybar cage. And this linkage rod C is this longer one here between the upper mixing arm and the washout plate. And this linkage rod A goes between the seesaw arm and the upper mixing arm. So make sure you don't get those confused, which ones are which. You know which one's linkage rod A, B, and C. And it shows you here, we're going to measure them all out. The A and B have the base of the 15mm rods, and C has the base of the 72mm rod. And you can see inside the package here on the right side, this is where we found the hardware for the linkage rods, and we found all the flybar, cage, and seesaw stuff here for the next step. Right in here. Pull these together and make sure we measure them to the length that we're doing our specific setup. And just make sure you look at what it says in the manual here. It shows, let's see, I think it's back here on this page that shows the second step, how with the linkages, there's one side that has a bit of a more open circular look, and that's going to be the one that goes in towards the ball, and the one that's just flush is the one that goes to the outside. So you want to make sure that you put them on the ball links correctly. So if we look at this one, see this outer part, see we've got a bit of a lining here, and this one's just flush and clean. So the part with the lining is the one that goes inside towards the ball, and we snap it on there, it's going to be that way. But we're going to measure this to length first and make sure we've got it set up for the specific setup that we're going for. So for my advanced, I'm going for the E2 on the upper mixing arm and B3 on the seesaw. I've got the S2. I'm just going to go for the recommendations. S3 would be a little bit more sensitive, but I'm going to go for the recommended setup with the basic advanced. For the seesaw, I'm going to the inner H2, and for the lower mixing arm, I'm going for the M2, which complies exactly with this setup here for the advanced settings. So linkage rod A, B, and C in the middle are going to have 2 millimeters, 1.5, and 59.75. So that's how I'm going to make sure I set up linkage rod A, B, and C to these lengths on the inside, and make sure I use the correct rods and have those ready to go for the rest of the steps here in the setup of the head for the Outrage Fusion 50. And we'll come here and update in just a second. Next step here is going to be putting the flybar cage together, and again we're going to go to the inside holes. We've got the seesaw here all set up from the previous step. Make sure it moves nice and smooth, and make sure when you're putting these ball links on here, just do them by hand at first. Just screw them in there to make sure it's level, and you don't cross thread it and you don't screw anything up, and make sure you've got the blue thread lock on there, and make sure once you've got it together that it's moving nice and tight and that you have the thread lock on this little pin. And these phasing pins were already put on the factory. All of the bearings were put on in the factory, so this should be ready to go, and we're ready to move on to the second step. Okay, now that we've got our ball links measured to the right size, we're going to make sure the one that's going on here onto the flybar control rod, if we look at page 6, we'll see that up here, the one here that goes on, let's move it down here, the one that goes on to the flybar control rod is actually linkage rod B. So for that next step, linkage rod B, and it doesn't really matter which setup you have, whether it's the beginner, intermediate, or advanced, linkage rod B is 1.5 millimeters in between. So this is going to be a 1.5 millimeter linkage ball, or linkage rod right here, and we're going to make sure we snap that onto the flybar control rod first. Let's see here. Okay, I've got the linkage rods right here, measured to size, 1.5 millimeters. The way it's set up, the open side is actually on the same side for this one, because if you again look at page 6 here, you'll see that this is going to snap on one way, and then it's going to also snap on the other way. So make sure they're on the same side, or you set it up so that the way you snap it on, that you're doing it correctly. Actually, just put them on opposite sides. The way you set it up, have both facing the same way, and then put them on opposite sides. I'll show you here what I'm talking about when we go through the second step. We're going to get the flybar rod here, get the flybar carriage base and the flybar rod, everything set up for the flybar cage, and we'll put that together. For all of these screws in here, make sure that you get a piece of paper and put some alcohol on there, and get everything cleaned out nice, and get all the oil off of these guys before you do it, because as you can see there's oil on these. So get some alcohol on a sheet of paper and get all the oil off of these before you put the thread lock on them, because when you're going in the metal, you want to make sure you use thread lock, but you want to make sure they're cleaned out. So as always, get every piece of hardware cleaned out before you put the thread lock on there, and you're going metal into metal. So we'll follow this part. Make sure we've got this set up correctly. Make sure that we've got the part of the ball that has the extra material and the extra lining around the outside is the side that goes in towards the ball link, and then we're just gonna push it on there like that, and it moves nice and smooth. So it looks like most of these aren't even going to need to be adjusted. So make sure you put them on correctly. And we'll get this part done, and we'll show you what we've got here in just a minute. Okay, little tip for getting through this next part. Just put together your flybar cage for the most part. You know, you've got both of your linkage balls on here, and you've got one half of it put together. What you're going to want to do is take this head and just kind of slide it on. You got your little 3-part. Slide it on here. Put that through. And then grab your second one. Slide that through. And then this is when you're going to want to put the hardware on this side and tighten both sides. There are no indents or anything on this flybar rod, which, you know, I'm used to having some sort of indents where you know where the grub screws go. So we're going to make sure, just going to have to make sure that we measure each side equally and that they're equal on both sides. But make sure just get the hardware in here, measure both sides, make sure they're exactly equal, and I'll come back and tell you what that number was once I put it together. And I've got the aggressive setup, so we're going to the inside ball. If you're doing stable or beginner 3D stuff, or just beginner stuff, go to the outside balls. And we'll come back once we've got the flybar cage put together and ready to go. Okay, moving on to the next step. Now that we've got this part together, it's looking nice and smooth. We've got the flybar cage towards the inside. These sides, they came out to about 340 millimeters per side. What I did was, without putting thread lock, I kind of, while I was trying to measure it, I kept tightening one side, and then once I got them nice and level, I put thread lock on the other side and got it nice and tight, and then pulled the other side out, put thread lock on that one, and then got that one nice and tight. So these are both nice and level and equal on each side, and you've got that part ready and set to go. So moving on to the next part, we're going to get the flybar, or the swash plate, and the washout base ready to go. So the swash plate is right here. The washout base stuff is actually here on this side, and there's hardware to go with both of those. So for swash plate, all we have to do is take this hardware, make sure we put it on it the way it says here. Just the linkage balls here on the outside, and there's 3 on the exterior part and 4 on the inside, and then there's these really tiny 3mm screws that are going to go on the bottom with the washers. All of that hardware is here in the bag. So we're going to make sure, you know, thread lock, we're going metal into metal, get the swash plate ready to go. And then there's also the washout base. Just like the picture, this longer part with the metal is going to be on the downside. These mixing arms are already prepared in the factory and ready to go. Just make sure as you set it up, it looks just like it looks in the manual. You've got this part out, and the longer part of the arm is going to match up with the longer part of the washout base, because we've got the screw here and the longer part of the arm right here. And we're going to make sure we put the ball links on here with this cap screw. We're going into metal, so thread lock. And for advanced, we're going to the outside for a little bit extra control. And we're going to make sure we also put thread lock on this little button head screw, the 12 millimeters, which are going to hold the mixing arms into the washout base. So follow the directions here. The bearings are already on here. They're all set to go. So everything here, and all the screws here to get everything in the washout base. And then we'll be ready to put all that stuff onto the main shaft. So we'll get this stuff ready, and we'll come show you what it looks like once it's all done and ready to go. Okay, next part we got done, we had the swash plate here. Make sure we got these 3 little screws at the bottom with the washers, and all of these little ball links. They all came in the same hardware bag, so it shouldn't be easy, or it should be a piece of cake to keep those together and make sure you've got that filled. Get that done, and the washout base with the mixing arms, screws in here. Just make sure, I went towards the outside, and these screws, make sure you've got the 2x8 with the ball links. Those come in just one little package. It's just the screws and the ball links. Don't get them confused with the other ones that have little 5.75 millimeter screws and ball links. They're close by, but we're going to use those later. Make sure you've got the 2 by 8 millimeter and you've got those screwed in there. So here's the finished product with the little washout base here. We've got this metal part on the bottom, long part of the arm goes with the long part of the base, ball link here at the end. Most of this is pre-assembled. You just actually have to screw in here. There's no washers in between. Everything's sized so that it only meshes with the smallest part of the bearing, so everything moves nice and smooth. You can get it nice and tight. Here's the swash plate. You've got all the ends here. Got the little 3 screws here at the bottom so that you're holding this whole thing together. I put some extra oil here in here, some tri-flow, to get this ball link moving a little smoother, but all of these ball links are the same. Make sure you use thread lock, and you've got this all set up. And basically, before we put it on to the main shaft, we're going to put these little parts together, because eventually it's going to slide on there with these links going here onto the bottom part of the swash plate. So now we've got these 2 little parts just snapped together. This part of the ball link, is going to go onto the inside of the swash plate. Now we're going to put it on the main shaft the way it describes in the manual, and just want to make sure everything's moving nice and smooth, and it falls up to the manual. Now I'll put this together, and we'll put the head onto the main shaft as well, and show you the way the whole thing looks, and also test and make sure it's all moving smooth still. Okay, moving on to the next part. First we're going to start by getting the main blade grips together. The arms for the grips come separately for some reason, and we're going to, there's a little bag that has 4 3x5 screws. We're going to get these grips ready to go, and then once we get those together, we're going to get this upper mixing arm ready to go. Set it up for the 3D characteristics that we decided on earlier. It's going to be on the inside, on this side where there's 2, and on the outside for the side where there's 3 here. And then that is going to end up here on the end of this top grip here, through the 3x12 millimeter screw. So we'll get these grips set up first, and then we'll line everything up to go into the main hub for the top here. So we'll get these grips ready. Most of these are factory installed in the grips, but then we'll just line up all these other little pieces and show you how these go on. So we'll come back and show you once we've got these set up. Okay, now we're going to put together the spindle and the grips in this part of the main head setup. So we want to make sure that we've got everything lined up correctly and that we've got everything in order the way it's supposed to be. We just built our grips right here, and we make sure the extended part of the arm goes towards the inside and the same side where the ball links go, and that you've put the ball links in the proper location compared, like depending on your setup. And we've put these on the ends here. I was kind of wondering why they have these separate arms, but it kind of makes sense if you get into a crash and you ruin this part and you don't want to buy a whole big piece of metal blade grip. It would cost just a lot less money to buy a little piece here, so it's actually more economical when you compare to what you would have to buy in the way of a main blade grip if you were to crash. For most normal kits, you have to get a whole blade grip. That'd be about $50, at least for a new set of blade grips. So just to get these arms would probably be a lot cheaper. So that's probably why they did the separate arms here, but make sure you've got this all set up and working the way it's supposed to be in the manual. So I've lined everything up the way it's supposed to be. We've got the dampener a little damper spacer, and the pre-assembled. So in the grips we've got the bearings already pre-assembled. We've got the thrust washer and the thrust bearings, and then another little washer and screw to hold it in. So I just lined everything up here in the correct order. We've got, I'm using the 3D more advanced, harder ones. The red ones would be more for an easier setup, more F3C kind of easy flying, but I'm doing hardcore kind of advanced setup right here. So I'm going for the black, which is a little thicker, a little harder, little spacer. All of these parts kind of came in different bags. It's kind of weird how the hardware was spread out, but you want to make sure you've got everything, and you measure it and make sure you've got exactly what you need. The feathering shaft, I've already put grease on the outside of this, so we're going to get that set up. Got the grip, got this washer, and the larger outer diameter is going to be towards the inside. Just to check to make sure you've got the right one that goes towards the inside, you put it in there and wiggle it around a little bit, and you should be able to wiggle it around. That's the one that goes towards the inside. The other one, when you put it in there, you can't really wiggle it around hardly at all. So smaller inner diameter goes towards the outside. The bearing, you're going to make sure the open face goes towards the inside to the center. I've already got this packed with grease. You want to pack this full of grease and make sure it goes towards the inside, so that when it swings out, the cage here on the outside helps hold the grease inside. If you've got with the face going towards the outside, all the grease will fall out and it won't really do you a whole lot of good. So larger outer diameter ball race with the open face towards the inside, towards the center hub. Smaller inner diameter, and then we've got this thicker washer. Again, this comes in a separate package with these guys. So we're going to set this one up. We're going to thread it through the top of the head right here. We're going to put our dampers in first, thread that part through, and then get the other part set up and thread this through, and then we're going to tighten both sides. Just do a lock on both sides with our double 4mm screws. So we'll put that together. Make sure you've got the correct order. Again, check with the manual. Make sure you've got damper, washer, the grip with all the pre-assembled bearings, another washer, thrust bearings, another larger washer, and then the screw. Make sure you've got all that correct order, and everything will move nice and smooth. If you don't, it might get notchy, if you have these thrust bearings in the incorrect positions. So make sure these have a certain position that they're supposed to be in every time. So we're going to put that together, and then we'll show you the whole thing moving nice and smooth when we're done with it. Okay, so now we've got the head mostly set up. I went to page 6 and made sure I got all my ball lengths measured, like I said, exactly the way we wanted them to go for the advanced settings. A, B, and C were measured to 2, 1.5, and 59.75 millimeters, and I put them in the correct locations. Got the head set up just like it says right here. A went here between the short part of the upper mixing arm and the seesaw. The long part, the long ball link here, number C, comes between the swash plate and the long part of the upper mixing arm. And then linkage B comes between the long part of the lower mixing arm and the flybar cage. So we get it set up just like that. Like I said here, we made sure we line this stuff up correctly. Got one side done. Push it through to the second side, torqued both sides and made sure they're really tight. Those are 4mm screws, so you can get them really tight, and you don't want these coming out. So thread lock and get them nice and tight there on the main center hub. And make sure you just put your ball links exactly where you want them to go. Next part, we're going to put the flybar paddles on here. We're just going to go with the recommended. We don't need to go with the very advanced just yet. We might move to that point later. I'll show you what we've got here. Grips, both of these are moving nice and smooth. The long part comes here towards the outside away from the grip. Shorter part comes here towards the grip. We've got ball link A, ball link C, ball link B. It looks just like page 6. We put the top button on here with a 3x8 millimeter. Everything's going in the middle, so make sure you use thread lock. This whole thing is set up and it's ready to go to the side, and we'll start moving on to putting the flybar paddles on there, and then after the flybar paddles we'll start putting together the mainframe. So that's how it goes together. Also, not sure I mentioned it yet, I'm going for the 120 ccpm, so I went towards, everything came, all of these little ball links came towards the side where there was only one place to put the ball link. The other ones are for 140, so we went towards the outside instead of towards the inside. So that's the head. We've got that together. We'll put the flybar paddles on there and come update before we move on to the mainframe. Okay, now we've got the flybar paddles on here. I ended up coming to 130 between these two. I mean, it says in the instruction manual 133 here between those, but I came to 130. I wanted to get it tight enough. It was 134 once I had both the sides even, so you just want to make sure that this is equal to this, and that it's level and equal and balanced on both sides. So tightened it up. You want to get the flybar paddle level with the top part here and level with the flybar cage. Same as usual. You want to get zero pitch at zero pitch. Same here on the other side. Zero pitch on zero pitch. And then you put the grub screw in here on the side, and you've got the whole head set up and ready to go. We've got about half of the frame put together, just showing you a little update of where we're at. We had the skinny little bottom plate. Make sure we've got the right screws and the washers. They all come together in one little bag. Make sure you've got the washers in there. Screw in here to the little M3 washers. They've got little plastic parts in there, so you don't need to use thread lock. Make sure you've got those in there, and you're going to be using a lot of self-tapping screws into plastic, so make sure you don't over torque them. Just get them in there nice and tight, and then once they're tight, just leave them there. You could probably put some CA or something on there. That's what I did. I put a little bit of CA on the tip of each one of these. Make sure you use the frame supports. There's this front one here, which looks like this, which goes up on the front part. You can see how it lines up with all the holes. And then the back one here, you can see lines up here on the back. See, both of them have these little sections here, which go to the bottom part where the skid mounts are. So make sure you've got those frame supports on there. So we've got the bottom plate, the frame supports, the front part. There's a little gyro mount here. All this stuff is kind of in separate bags. You're going to have to make sure you go through all that stuff and pull it out. It's mostly in that one single tray. But make sure that you're pulling out the correct stuff, the self-tapping screws into plastic, and that everything's the correct length. There's also this little frame brace here, which we screwed in here. And this little part right here for the canopy mount. There's a frame brace here at the bottom, and the frame brace also is held on by one of these little carbon fiber pieces, and that holds up here, and then you line it up with a little indent here at the top, and then at the top you screw in the top canopy mount. So this is half of the frame. We've got this little bearing block in here, and you can see it slides up and down. We're not going to tighten that just yet, because later we're going to make sure that we've got the main shaft going through nice and smooth, and we're going to get that tightened so that everything's moving nice and smooth when we do that. There's also these flange bearings. These little flange bearings come in a separate bag. Make sure you put CA on the outside of the flange bearings and put them from the inside. The larger diameter is going to be on the inside, smaller diameter on the outside. So put some CA on there, put them on there, put them on your other frame, let them dry. And this is what we have so far. Just about caught up to this part here in the manual. And we've also put together the elevator arms here, getting this part set up. And just like it says in here, to set this part up, you're going to have to pull this part out, which is kind of stashed there in the right side of the little tray of parts when you put those together. Pull out the control rod. There's a longer side and a shorter side. Just make sure, first thing you're going to want to do is open this up and use this long cap screw to screw the ball link onto here. And then once you've got the ball link on there, these flange bearings are already in this. And then you're going to slide this other piece in here. Put these little screws on here on the end. Make sure you use the 3x6. And then the ones down here are the 3x5. Once you line up the little indents, line up these indents, put those through there, and then you're good to go on that. So once you put that together, here's what we've got. The part that is going to go on to the ball bearing is here. So comes inside this way. Ball bearing comes on from this side. Short side here, long side here. And we've matched up the indents, and we put the screws in there and make sure it's moving nice and smooth. So we've got that together. We're going to put that through the flange bearing for now. We're not going to do anything with it just yet. Later we're going to put some elevator arms on it, but we're going to have to get the second side ready to put that on, and then we'll come and update and show you what we've got. Okay, next part we're going to do here on the frame is get all of the motor mount hardware set up here and ready to go. There's this little part here with there's a longer end. This is actually the main shaft is going to go through this one, and it's going to connect here to where the motor mount actually is. And then there's this lower motor mount it's actually the pinion support, and there's going to be two bearings available. So if you have a 5mm, make sure you put the 5mm bearing in here. I've got the 6mm, so I put that in there. I made sure on the outside I put a little bit of thread lock so that it stays in place and it doesn't shift around. So I've got that in there. Put this on the frame, put this on the frame, and get ready to line this up so that we can see exactly where we want to put the pinion and where we want to put a little spacer or gap here on the shaft of the motor. So here we go. We put this little guy in place. This is going to shift left and right because later we'll adjust the gear mesh and make sure the part where the bearing goes in is facing up. This long one, the bearing part where the bearing goes in is facing down, and this one we've already put on here, the bearing part is facing up. So we've got this, and we've taken the motor and we've put it here, 4 screws on the little motor mount. The little indent part is facing away. It won't really go on the other way. So and what we're going to do is put this in place with the pinion. Okay, so this is actually going to end up screwing in here on this part of the main block. And you want to line up your pinion here so that there's a little tiny gap here between the bottom bearing. See right here, little tiny gap. So you want to make sure you've got it in place the way you're going to have it, and then you push it up just a little bit and then use a little pin, mark inside the hole inside there, and take the motor out, and that's where you're going to end up putting your little indent. Oh, here we go. Okay, so I put mine on there earlier. Get a little red mark right there. That's where I'm going to put my indent. So I'm going to pull this little motor mount back off and put a little plastic bag around here. Use a Dremel tool. Just make sure you don't get any little fibers inside the motor. Put a little indent there, and then put the pinion back on, so we know that we've got the pinion mounted in the right spot, and with the indent and the grub screw, it'll be in the correct spot. So after that, we'll have the motor mount on there, and we'll still keep this a little bit loose so we can adjust the mesh. So other part I put together for the frame. Also, remember, sand off the frame. I also put the servo mounts. Really easy, it all comes here in one package. Put the two extruding sides through these holes, and the little single screw to hold these in place. And then later we'll put the servos on there. So here we go, still the right side of the frame. We'll put the motor mount on there, and we'll come and show you what we've got there. Also, we put the servo mounts on the tail servo mount here, so tail servo holder. So we're going to go and grind up the Scorpion motor, and we'll come back and show you once it's all set up. Another little update here with the motor mount on. Now that we've got this part on here, this little mount, and this little mount down here, we've also got the main motor on here. Now there's these two screws, and this screw, and these two screws, and we're just keeping them pretty loose for now. Just tighten them and then back them out a little bit so that you can move the motor for later when you need to adjust the gear mesh. So we're going to do that, and when we slap on the left side of the frame, we're going to make sure that we keep those loose as well. And then later we'll go and we'll tighten those up when we have to. And then we also put the tail servo mount here on the right side. So this is the right side of the frame with the motor mount on here. Also made sure we have like a little 1 millimeter gap, you know, between the bottom mount here and the motor here. And I made sure, you know, carved out a little spot to make sure that I've got the grub screw on a little indentation there on the motor, just to make sure that it doesn't move. So there we go. Now the next thing we're going to do is slap on the left side of the frame. Just make sure that you get your little servo mount set up on those, and that the flange bearing is, remember, goes from the inside. Make sure you've got that glued on, and we're going to put that on top of here and get all the screws around there, get that nice and tight, and then we'll show you the frame once we've got that ready to go. Okay, now we've got the other side sandwiched on to the frame. Got most of this almost kind of put together. Nice skinny frame. Make sure you've got, you know, the brace here in the back. Canopy mounts are up here. Make sure you get these frame supports, these other little carbon fiber pieces. There's one here in the back and one in the front. There's also this one part here. You can see there's a little oval hole right here in the frame, and look at the manual and it'll show one side you drive in to the brace, and then the other side is going to hold the canopy. And it's got another piece just that holds the canopy mount up here. Same sort of thing. It fits right in place in there, and you can get in here to access and make sure you put the frame mount in there. You can see the specifics on how to do that, I believe, here on page 10. This little part up here, you know, make sure you use the what is this here, 3x8 to screw into the frame mount. It's kind of hard to see the way they show it here in the picture, but once you kind of put it together, it makes a little bit more sense. and then the front canopy mount, which is the smaller one. Make sure, longer one on the back, smaller ones in the front. And then we're going to put this together, and you'll see that front frame mount is right there, where both of those are. And it looks like there's actually little indents here to hold the wires for the motor, so that'll be nice and organized there when we put the ESC up here. But we'll be doing that later on. Looks like we've got the frame mostly together. All we have to move on to next is this little support brace for the motor. This thing's going to go around the motor. Then the upper bearing block right here, it's the one that's got these little screws in there, so make sure that when you put it in there that you put the 4 little teeny tiny screws in the top to hold the bearing block in, and it's on the side where it's the bigger diameter, the part where the bearing goes in. So we're going to put those together, and then we've got the mixing arms we're going to set up, or the pitch bell crank assembly. Put that together. You see one part's got a indent that sticks out, and the flat side is the side that you actually put all of the linkage balls on. Make sure you've got this flat washer. It's the 0.5 millimeter. Measure the inner and outer diameter. Make sure it matches up with the manual, because you've got a couple different washers of different sizes. There's also the shim washer, which goes on the inside, and we're going to put that together. And then there's also mixing arms on the right side. Same deal. The linkage balls go on the flattest side, and the indent side is going to go in towards the frame. So we'll get that part put on, the upper bearing block, these little aileron bell crank, elevator bell crank, and pitch bell crank. And once we get those on, we'll show you what we've got, and then we're going to move on to the skids. Just make sure that you're using all of the correct washers in all of the correct positions, and measure them twice. Just double check, look at your materials here, and make sure you do it right. Okay, so we'll come back and show you once we've got that all set up. Okay, now we've got all the bell cranks and the support here for the motor and the rest of the frame. There's a wider part here on the support, which is going to go towards the center where the hub is. What you're going to do is put this bearing block in place on the inside, and then on the outside of the front part you use the same. It's like a 3x8 millimeter screw with no washer, and you go straight in there. Remember, you're going in the middle, so use thread lock. And then in the front you've got some 3x8s as well, but you're using these M3 washers. So you've got that in there, and in the back, same situation, except you're using M3 washers for all of the bell cranks. What I had going on here, let's see, because we had the long side on the right side of the frame, so the front is facing this way. Long side of that little arm is on the right, so we're going to put 2 of those mixing arms here, or bell cranks here, and then 1 of them on the left side. So what I had, when I had it in there, I had some space for this little, the cyclic bell crank, and it was going back and forth, and then there wasn't enough room on the left side over there. What you want is for that to be flush on this side, and for this to not have any forward back play going this way. You want to be able to push this and make sure you have your washers in there correctly. The little washers that you put on there first, mine were a little tight. I had to push them in there, and then a little piece of it came off, and I had to kind of clean it up to get those on there, but they fit on there nice and tight. You want to make sure these are moving nice and smooth. I also put the ball links here. At all of them there's a flat side, and where the flat side is, the opposite of where the indentation sticks out is the side where you put the ball links. So this one's got 2, this one's got 3, this one's got 3. Then what we do right here, there's a little notch. You want to line up and put the grub screw in there with the notch. There's also one on the other side. I had an extra grub screw, and I just put 2 grub screws in there. So when this arm moves, you want the elevator arm to move with it. And if if this does have play and it's not right, you're going to have to pull this bearing block and lift this thing up and access the 2 screws that hold the elevator arm in place, and scoot this in here and then tighten those so that there's no play in here, and then on this side it's nice and flush. And don't forget your washer there at the end, and then everything's moving nice and smooth. So that's most of the frame. We don't have the bearing blocks really tight just yet. Still everything's a bit loose in the frame, but that's just because we're going to, you know, adjust the gear mesh, and then later we're going to lay this frame on a flat surface like a glass or something that's nice and flat, and put the main shaft through here and make sure we can slide the main shaft nice and smooth as we slowly tighten the bolts that hold the bearing blocks in place. And we want to make sure that once they're all nice and tight and we gradually tighten those, that it's moving nice and smooth. We'll show you a little later, because if you don't do that, you're probably going to end up killing your bearings pretty quick. So there we go for now. One more little look at what we've got. So this one's moving on its own. There's no washer between these two because there's an indentation that sticks out of this bell crank. Just a nice little look here at the frame to see what we've got going on. Sometimes like those pictures in the manual can be a bit confusing. So, okay, next part we're going to move on to, fairly simple here. We're going to put together the skids and put them on the frame to finish that part up. Pretty easy. Just make sure you grab all the hardware that's in there. Most of it's already in the bag. There's just this one bag that has all of that. There might be some washers to the side that you grabbed earlier that you might have to use, but same story, you know. Set it up, little indent, or the bend here is in the front. We're going to put these little strut tube caps here on the end. We're going to use CA to hold them in place, and there's also these little cap screws that hold, like right here, yeah, the little cap screws that hold the skid pipe in place in the skids. Don't over tighten that. You're just going to want to make sure you get it in there so that it's staying in place and it's not wiggling by itself. Pretty simple. We're going to put that up underneath the frame. There's these little parts here. We're going to put the little washers, the lock nut M2.5 washers underneath there, and screw from underneath and get those in there. And you don't need thread lock or anything. Those are already the lock nut washers. So we'll come back and have the skids put together and have most of the frame just about set to go. Okay, now we've got the skids on there and they're ready to go. Make sure, you know, it faces forward. Some people might want to do other stuff, but traditional is to have the skids facing forward. You've got the long screws and the little black washers here that came out of a bag from earlier on, and the lock nut washers in there. Don't get those too tight. You don't want to overkill it and compromise the integrity. You're just going through plastic, and you can keep tightening that and end up cracking and killing it. Same with these ones here. These little hardware screws were the ones that came in the bag with the skids. You don't want to over tighten them. You can see there's a gap here where you've got them, and you can just keep tightening that, but you might end up just breaking it if you keep going. So just make sure the skid pipes are faced the way you want them to be when you tighten them down. And these little ends were already glued in place, so we didn't have to do that. That was already done in the factory. So here we go. We've got this. The frame is ready for the servos to go in place, and we will be doing that after we put the tail together. Alright, next part, we are going to move on to the tail, get that done, or get it started at least. This part right here, most of this you'll see comes pre-assembled, but there's no thread lock on the screws, So make sure, what I did is one screw at a time, pulled it out, cleaned it with alcohol, wiped it down, dried it off, put the thread lock on there, and then put it back in. So make sure you go around this whole thing and get every single screw around both sides and get the thread lock on there. Make sure you clean it off. Make sure your gear mesh is good. Mine is perfect. You know, they put it together just for quality purposes. In the factory, they don't actually put any of the thread lock on it. So then you're also going to want to get these 2.5 by 8 screws with the washers and the fin. So just like it says here, all this is put together. You just do the thread lock, put the fin on, and then you'll have that set. And then next thing you're going to do is move on to the blade grips. And most of this is also, again, pre-assembled in the factory. But you're also going to want to make sure you pull out the screws, put some thread lock on there, get some grease on the thrust bearings, open those up. They're already in the correct order, so just make sure you keep track of what order they're in. Use like a hex driver or something to hold them all in place, and get some thread lock on there and get some grease on the thrust bearings. Don't get any thread lock on the bearings though, because it might cause things to tighten up. So we're going to get that part done and come back and show you both these parts when they're all set and ready to go. Alright, tail case put together here. Got the fins on there, the washers. Like I said, thread lock on that. This, I took it apart. Mine actually had some grease. I put some extra thread lock on the threads that came out fairly easily. But you know, you just want to make sure everything's moving nice and smooth. This part right here, there's some screws that will end up going in. Let's see, this part is already put together, and it had thread lock on it and everything. So this little slider's all set, but there's these screws that you put to put the sliders into the fins. And basically the setup here is, you see how the screw comes in on this side. Well, the screw is going to come in to the blade grip on the opposite side. So screw head coming in this way, screw head coming in this way. So that's how you know which side it goes on. So now we're going to put this on here and move on to the next step, which is to put together the rest of the tail pitch slider. Get all of that finished up, and we're going to make sure we put it on here as we put the grips and this actual slider down here. So this is actually the tail bell crank assembly. Make sure we've got the right screws, 2x6. There's another little set of pin screws right here. They've got little button heads on them. More cap screws there. The blades, I guess, yeah, we'll just put the blades in there while we're at it. Might as well. And then we're going to slide that all on here. So the way I'm going to do it is to put the bell crank assembly on first, and then slide the tail pitch slider on, and I'll use the grub screw to make sure it's held securely on here where the notch is, and then I'll put the little pin screws through the tail pitch slider to hold that in place, and then that'll be all set. And make sure you put the ball link here on the slider. The slider you actually have to put together here. So 2.2x6 cap screws here to hold the arm onto there, and make sure you use the correct little flange bearings and then the linkage ball. So we're going to put this together, and then we'll have the tail case all set and ready to go. And again, make sure you use thread lock when you're going metal into metal. Also, if you ever need it, there's this little tool that came in here. I think I'm going to be able to use it later to line up the servos and make sure all of that stuff is lined up perfectly. But you can also use it. What I did was, when I pulled the screws out here to make sure everything was right, I put it through and made sure everything was still in the same place. And this is just a useful tool that you can use throughout the process. So we'll come back once we've got that tail cage set up. Okay, so now we've got the tail completely set up and ready to go. And just like I said, we put this part on first. The flange bearings are already put in place. Some screws, some pretty small screws in there, 2 by 6 millimeter. Make sure everything's moving nice and smooth. You've put thread lock on the grub screw and you've got it right at the notch. It's pretty heavy duty here, so these should hold up nice. And this is nice and smooth, so I'm looking forward to a nice solid tail there. Never hurts to put a little bit of oil in there, lube it up on both sides. So that's that little tail unit there. So now we'll move on to the next step here. Actually, I'll slap the blades on there, and then we'll start talking about getting the torque tube together and getting the bearings on there. It says on the blog there at outrage.com that you want to make sure you use some 5-minute epoxy to hold these bearings on. So that's what I'm going to do, use some 5-minute epoxy and make sure that you place them exactly how it tells you to place them down here. But we'll get that stuff together and go into that with a bit more detail here in a minute. Okay, now we pulled out the torque tube unit. It's going to have these little ends in a separate bag with some hardware. And before we put these little end pieces on, we're going to mark the spots where we want to put the bearings, and we're going to put the bearings on and get those all set. So it says down here, from one end it's going to be 230 millimeters, and then from the other end it's going to be 275. So I already went in there and measured and put a little mark on here. You probably can't see it on the camera, but a little mark on each spot. Basically, if you have them on level spots, it could resonate and cause issues with your tail, so you want to have them not level. Just go with the recommendations. So I'm going to put the 5-minute epoxy on there, and what I've done is I've already put the bearings here inside the bearing supports, and we're going to put a little bit of tri-flow on the outside of this when it's time to slide it into the torque tube, or into the tail boom. But right now, just going to slide those on here. Make sure that you get the bearings on before you put these end pieces on here, because once you do that, you're using screws and you won't be able to put the bearings on. You'll have to take it back out. So we'll get the bearings in here first, and then once we get that done, pretty simple. The hardware that was supplied with the tube shaft spline, with this little part that we're putting here on the end, and a little lock nut washer, you just line up the holes, put them through, and then you've got your torque tube ready to go. So we'll come back and show you once we've got the torque tube ready, and before we put it here into the tail boom. Okay, now we've got the torque tube all ready to go. We've got the bearings in here with the bearing supports, the little plastic pieces. They're measured out here. One is 230, one is 275, and we've also got the little spline, the spleen here on the end, and we use the hardware. This was a little tough to screw through here. Make sure this is pushed down all the way and get it screwed through. I had to really torque it to get through. I thought I was going to end up stripping it, but I didn't, and I got all the way through and was able to get this on there. So now what we're going to do is take the boom and slide this whole torque tube down the boom. Basically, what I did, the side that I pushed the bearings onto, like that, that's the side that I'm going to slide into the tube, because there's a bit more, glue on the one side that I was sliding onto, because it kind of stopped, and once I worked it in there. So I'm going to, we'll probably have better chances of not moving these by pushing it in that direction. And we're also going to make sure we use, here I'll use some tri-flow, use some oil up the bearing supports, these rubber parts, and oil up the inside of the boom to make sure we can slide this in here nice and smooth. and then we'll come back once we've got it. Okay, so you can slide this in here nice and smooth, and once you've got that slid in there nice and smooth, we'll come back and show you the little ends of the torque tube will just stick out of the tail boom just a little bit, and then we'll be able to put the front block and the back tail case on there. But we're also going to want to make sure that we put the tail push rod supports on the tail boom before we do that. So get this going, and then we'll show you how to put the other parts on there. Okay, this is the tail boom now with the torque tube in there. You see, you just move one end and the other end moves nice and smooth. You want to make sure this is a pretty tight fit in the boom, so you want to make sure you've got it set up so that you grease up the inside really nice, get it nice and lubed up, as well as the bearing supports, and make sure the bearings are in place really tight. Use epoxy, give it time to set, give it 30 minutes or something, and then make sure they're nice and tight and before you put them in there. And then you can also use this little tube that comes holding all of the tail equipment. You can also use that to guide it in there, and you can also use it to push it in and double check and measure. Once you pull it out, make sure you know that the bearings are still at 230 and 275, and then that way you will know that your bearings haven't moved. And you can also kind of like, you know, push on the bearings a little bit and make sure they're still solid and in place. So once you do that, you got the tail boom together. I'm going to have the Outrage, the letters facing forward. Let's see on the other side. So, yeah, they're going to be facing forward or backward in one way or the other. So, the three main parts, the tail that we've already put together, and this block, which is already pre-assembled in the factory. Everything's nice and smooth. I've got no play in it. The tail, we put the fins on. Make sure that the fins, this is going to be spinning, let's see, if you're looking down at the blades counterclockwise, so make sure the leading edge is facing the leading edge here of the grip. Okay, so put those on there, and before we put those parts on, we've got these little push rod supports. Make sure they're all lined up correctly, all the exact same way, and we're not going to get them completely tight. We're just going to, you know, screw the screw in there a little bit and make it so we can still slide back and forth, because later we're going to adjust exactly where they're at. But make sure you put these on, push those through before we put the front block and the rest of the tail assembly on there. So we'll come back, we're going to put this back together, and then we'll have the tail all set up and ready to put into the main frame. Okay, now we have the tail unit ready to go here. Got the block in the top, so make sure when you move this that the tail is moving. Basically, you know, put this in here. There's only one side, the tail boom. There's one side that has the full open front, which is the only one that's going to be able to slide down here and line up. One side's got the hole. I'm not sure what the hole is for because we didn't actually drill into the hole or anything. We're going to pin the boom here at the top. I'm actually going to drill a little hole in there so that I don't just put a bunch of stress on the boom. So I'm going to make sure I drill a little hole in there before I put a boom, or before I pin that boom here. So this is a new version of the kit. The old version didn't have that, and some people were having issues with that sliding out. Make sure you get all four of these all lined up. Don't over tighten these. Again, you're just going into plastic. You don't want it to crack, so just get it tight and then leave it at that. Make sure everything's lined up. If you push too hard on this, this might slide out a little bit and it could get notched up. make sure you don't do that. So kind of push on this gear as you're pushing the tail boom in and lining them up. Then we've also got these supports for the tail pitch slider. A small part facing up with the screw. And next thing we're going to do, put the tail pitch slider on here. The one with the little Z angle is going to face towards the front where the block is, like this. Okay, so we're going to put this through and put the little ends on these, and we're just going to kind of get them on there. We'll get everything centered a little bit later on when we get the servo set up and ready to go. And then we'll also line up where we put these supports, so we're going to keep those loose for now as well. So I'll come and show you once we've got this whole thing set up. Okay, now we've got the tail push rod on here. The little Z shape is facing towards the front. Later we're going to adjust these when we put it on the frame. So these little supports are still loose for now. And I did attach it to this little servo here. Just, again, make sure everything's sliding nice and smooth. And this part now is ready to go into the mainframe. Okay, now that the tail's done and we're putting that to the side, we're going to move on to getting the servos on the frame. First thing we're going to do before we do that, make sure you lay your frame on a nice flat surface. And like I said earlier, use the main shaft here going through the 3 main bearing blocks and tighten the bearing blocks slowly, one at a time. And what I did was, what worked best for me was to tighten the middle one first, get those nice and tight. Still had no binding in there. Then got the top one, those were lined up, no binding in there. If you start get binding, back it out a bit and start tightening another screw or try to adjust it so that you got to make sure that the shaft is moving nice and smooth. The bottom one has some notches and a lot more play, so that one's a little trickier. Get both sides. I do one, and then on the other side I do one, and then here, and kind of slowly get it, work them in, and make sure as I'm doing that I keep sliding this up and down. You want to make sure you get all of them tight, all 3 bearing blocks, and be able to slide the main shaft. So this one's perfect. I can even drop it in here, and it just slides in there nice and perfect. Goes right into that bottom bearing block as I push it in. So that's exactly how you want it. Nice flat surface, and the main shaft moving through the frame here nice and smooth. So now that we've got all those tight, we still got the motor loose. We're not tightening those ones just yet. What we're going to do now is put the servos into the frame. I've got some DS610s. Those finally arrived for me. And I've got some servo horns. I'm going to drill some holes in the servo horns. They're supposed to be 15 millimeters from the center. So I'll make sure I line those up correctly and then drill my holes where they need to be. Servos, all the cyclic and elevator go up front. Pretty convenient because most kits I see, they have like an elevator servo here in the back, and then the push-pull system, it's really hard to get that bottom linkage rod connected. It can be a real pain in the butt. So having it forward and accessible is really kind of a good feature. I kind of like that. So make sure you've got all the stuff for putting the servos together. We've got right here, all of the servos are going to go into the frame with the rotating part facing up. So this part is facing up on the left and the right sides. And make sure you use the carbon fiber little frames on the outside, and the dents go towards the middle of the servo. I'm not going to use the little metal parts through, but I'm going to use the little pieces of rubber in each of the 4 holes, and then the carbon, and then the screws that it tells you to use right here, which are these 2.5 by 10. We're going to put the tail servo in. I've actually put the tail servo in there. That one has the rotating part facing towards the rear. Probably going to have to get a servo extension to get this to go to the front where I plan on putting the receiver. And that's pretty simple right there. I'll show you what we've got when we've got the servo horns on there. The ball links are going to face towards the outside in every case. Ball links are going towards the outside. And we're going to have to measure the linkage rods to length. It's going to be these really long rods, 120 millimeter rods. 108.3 millimeters is the gap in between for those. So we're going to have 2 of those for linkage rod D, and then there's also these ones down here, 145 and 85.5 with centers of 131 and 85.5, or oh, it's 98 millimeter, but the inner length is 85.5. So we're going to follow this along, get the servos mounted. Pretty simple. It takes a bit of time. We're going into metal, which is pretty convenient. We're not using little plastic end screws. We've got servo mounts, which are really nice. So you're going metal into metal. You can use thread lock if you want. And we'll get that done and come and show you once we've got that set up. Okay, now we've got all the servos set up and set to go. So just like I explained, carbon fiber plates on the outside. Make sure you use the correct screws, and make sure you use thread lock on these because you're going into metal and these are big enough and you want them nice and tight. So thread lock on these circles facing towards the outside. On the right side, make sure you put the 2 spacers on the servo in the front. This is going to be the elevator, and make sure you have that spacer so this one sticks out a little bit further because its arms are going to come towards the same direction, and you don't want to have them binding up. So get the spacers out of the bag, and there's also longer 19 millimeter screws that you're using to screw in these ones. These other ones, the cyclic servos have 10 millimeter. Same thing here on the right. Run those wires forward. That's what I did. I have a hole here in the front plate, and run those forward. For the tail, pretty simple. I had to put a little servo extension on there, but ran the wire here. There's conveniently a nice couple slots here for a zip tie, slots here for a zip tie. For this connection part, make sure you either, I don't know, I put a little CA on these so they stay together so that vibration doesn't cause the little connector to fall apart, or put like some shrink wrap on there. Little connector here, and we just ran the servo up here to the front. The gyro is going to be right here, so it's going to plug into where the gyro is at. So we've got all the wires for the servos coming up to the front. Perfect way to get it nice and tested out, and the servos and the wires are nice and clean. You know, nothing that you can really see. So just make sure this is nice and tight, and you avoid making any connections with anything else. So the batteries are going to be under here. I won't be hitting anything with that. So that's pretty simple. Got those servos plugged in. Now what we're going to have to do is always the funnest part of the build, not really, is put together these ball link arms. We've got this bag of ends, and then we've got all the linkage rods right here. And like I said earlier, you know, measure them to length. And make sure that the open sides of the ball link ends are the ones that are going into the balls correctly. There's going to be 2 that come here for the elevator servo, 2 that come here, 2 that come here, and then we're going to test out, make sure everything's going the correct direction, and come back once we've got all the servos set up. I'm using a DX7, a little 120 degree swash mix. I'm not going to go into detail exactly about how to set up all the servos and get everything centered. I've got a channel on my video on how to set up a DX7, so if you're curious how to do that, look on my channel. Otherwise, you know, I expect you know how to use your radio, or know how to use a transmitter, If you have any questions, you can just send me questions on my channel as well. So we're going to get that ready to go and come back and show you once we have made sure that the swash plate and everything's moving in the directions that we want. Okay, now we've got the servos set up. It was actually pretty easy to do with this kit. I really like it. Once you get your horns on there and centered, you basically just want to have it centered with the servo. It's at the proper angle that you're going to need already. So just make sure you have a 90-degree angle on all the servos. You know, the longest ones here go on the elevator, shortest ones are going to go here on the inside on the pitch servo. And there's also this tool that came with the kit. You can use that. There's a little hole here in the bell cranks, and you can line it up with the hole in the back and make sure as you give the sub trim that it lines up perfectly. So you use that to line it up. For the elevator, there's a little arrow right here. You can see you set the trim so that it lines up with the middle of this elevator bell crank arm, and then the same on the right side. Line it up, arm faces towards the inside, and use this tool to line it up. So getting everything nice and centered is nice and easy on this kit. In the DX7, made sure I've got everything set up properly. Forward cyclic, or forward elevator makes everything go forward, backward. Right cyclic makes the servos move. The one on the facing from the rear, the one on the for left aileron, I've got the one on the right going up and the one on the left going down, like this. And then for right aileron, they go like this. I'll show you here with the transmitter. Let's see. So I've got So make sure you get it set up like that. Reverse your servos or your swash mix or however you have to do it, and make sure your sub trim's perfect and that these things are centered, and that you've got all the arms measured to the perfect length, and that your servos aren't overloaded. I had to you know, put it on there, kind of test it out, put it on there, test it out, but see how, you know, center stick, you can't hear the servos buzzing. If they're buzzing a little bit, that's, you know, it happens. I got really lucky with the way I got everything set up right now. See, one of them's buzzing a little bit, and at certain pitches they'll buzz, but for the most part they're okay. You don't want them all screaming like this, but you know, they might a little bit. You want to put as little bit of, you know, torque on the servos as possible. So that part of the body is about ready. For the tail, we made sure we got this nice and centered. Oh, that's not plugged in right now, but I had it plugged in so that you know, we're putting the ball link on the left side, ball in the middle of the linkage rod, or of the servo horn, sorry, and on the left side. So that's all set, ready to go into the gyro. And basically, now that we've got all the servos in there and set up on the transmitter, all we have to do is put the head on, put the tail on, and get everything else organized. And we'll show you each step before we do that. Right now, I think first thing we're going to do is put the head on here. There we go. It should still slide through nice and smooth, and it does. So with that sliding through nice and smooth, we're going to, oh, actually, I don't think I've prepared the main gear yet. Okay, now we're going to get set to install the gears and get the rotor head installed into the main shaft. The way the kit comes together, most of this is pre-assembled except These screws, you have to slide it apart and make sure you clean off these screws, put thread lock on them, and then put them through the bottom part into the top. Get those screws in there, and then put the rest of it back together. Don't forget this little brass bushing. It's pretty big. Everything fits together nice and perfect, and then it should all move perfectly as well. And everything else is basically already in place the way it comes from the factory. There's also going to be this little shim. Don't forget to put this little shim washer. It's a stepped washer, and this part that sticks out is going to go in towards the top of the gear. Alright, so the gear moves one way, not the other way. And then the shim, the larger outer diameter faces out, basically. And it fits in there nice and perfect, and then it won't move around. So we're going to slide that into the main frame, like so, down here. Pretty simple. And then we're going to slide the main shaft through, and we're going to go into the bottom hole. The screw, the hardware that came with it, it's the bottom Jesus bolt or mass screw. Just make sure that we put it through the bottom hole here on the shaft. So that goes in there, screw goes in the bottom hole. I like, personally, before I put it in here, yeah, shim fell out. Make sure you don't lose the shim, make sure you put it in place. I like to take this lock nut washer and just put it in here first, get it nice in place, and make sure the holes are lined up and you can see through the holes here the way it's supposed to. And if not, if you can't see through, if you move it in the direction that it's a little tough, it'll start moving the inside and you can line up the holes. So make sure you do that, and then when you go through, just kind of, once you get through the first half of it, put your finger here and hold this one in place, and then come in and start screwing on that and get that one screwed through. So we're going to get that installed, main gear and this, and then we'll also measure these last little linkage rods out to 29.3 millimeters and attach those and get the swash plate attached, and then we'll have the whole head attached to the main frame, and then we can move on to getting the tail part put on, and that part should be pretty simple. So we'll come and show you what we've got when it's all ready to go. Okay, now we've got the head on, and we've got the swash plates moving exactly as we want it to, so that is all set to go and ready. A couple final notes. Earlier I tightened this bottom bearing block. I wasn't supposed to do that just yet. So if you find that this main gear is a little tight fitting in there, then that's probably why. You need to back these out, bring it down, and so instead of using a collar up here or underneath the bearing block to keep that in place, what they do is you go through here, you get the main gear in, and then you go through the bottom bearing block, and then you push that up, and you try to keep it nice and level on both sides, and then you tighten it on both sides, and then you make sure that there's no play, up or down play here in the main gear. So the little slots here is so that you can go through and then later tighten the bottom bearing block. So you'll probably, if you've been following along and haven't watched the videos, you might have to back these out. I'll try to put notes in there so that you'll know to back these out, or not to tighten these just yet, and that you'll have to do it, tighten them when you put the main gear in there. One other quick note. I had to see, I cut these servo horns for the aileron and the pitch, because as it was turning, the ends of the ball links were actually rubbing up against the rest of the servo horn. I wasn't seeing that here on the elevator, so I left that how it was. Make sure there's no play up and down or bending going on your linkage rods as these move to their full travel range. So there we go. We've got that all set. We're going to come back and put the tail on here, and then we'll just about have this bad boy together. Also make sure, you know, this whole thing is spinning nice and smooth, and it is. Without blades on it, it's already spinning great, so that's just perfect. Alright, we'll be right back. Okay, now we have finally joined the tail here onto the main frame. There's 6 bolts on each side, little 3x10, and you use those M3 special washers to go through. You're going into metal, so be sure to clean them off, get all the oil off, and then get the thread lock on there, and then go through the washers and get that done on both sides. And now what we're going to do, we still haven't adjusted these little tail push rod supports just yet. What we're going to do is put the tail boom support guys on here. So these are all ready to go in the factory. We're also going to need the fin, the tail fin, and the little metal parts. This little bag that has some hardware, this long one is going to go in the middle here, and then these 2 shorter ones are going to go outside in between, like it says here in the manual. Make sure you use 25mm, go through the flat washer. It's a millimeter flat washer. Then through the front support standoff in here, and then in the middle, see, we've got this little support threaded spacer, and same thing on the other side. And then on the tail, a little 3x10 through the flat washer into the bottom metal part. Let's see, these look okay. They're not identical. Only one side has the screw holes in the top. That's the side that goes to the top, and the bottom one that has the screw holes in the side there that goes in the bottom, that's what you're going to use to hold the frame together, or the tail boom support rods. So don't forget those, all these little parts. Get your hardware out. Don't tighten anything until you've got it all set up and ready to go. These are already done in the factory. We'll come back once we've got those tail support rods on here, as well as the fin, and then we can go into setting up where to put these little guides. So we'll be right back once we got these on. Okay, now we got the tail boom support rods on here, and just like I described, you got the little spacers in here, the little spacer in the middle. Make sure you use the washers. Make sure you get them on there nice and tight with thread lock. These are, you know, items that you really don't want coming out. Very important. If they come out, you won't be happy. Up here, we've got the same thing, washers. The fin is on with these 2 really tiny 2mm screws on there, as you can see. And there's also little washers, little teeny tiny washers that go with them too. This tail push rod guide is, the first one is, you know, a little bit behind the fin. Other one's right behind the Outrage sign, and the one in the front, what I did was I actually went in and set up my gyro and all my endpoints and my limits, and once this is all the way to the back, you're going to get to this first limit out, and then take this, move it all the way to the end of where the little Z bend is, and then move it back just like 1 or 2 millimeters, and you just want to have it as close to this little Z bend as possible, and then just push it back a little bit and then tighten it. Look from the bottom and make sure the rod is all level all the way back to where it hits the ball link. Look at it from the rear and from the bottom. Make sure you don't forget this little pin right here. I drilled a hole in there and put the pin to pin the tail boom. I also, you know, like I said, went in and put my electronics in there. I set up my Castle ESC, and my what I'm using is a mini G gyro on this. I've got tutorials on my channel on how to do both of those. I'm using just a little 6 amp align BEC, and put my receiver up here in the front. ESC here, the battery is right here in the front. All that stuff is programmed and ready to go. Just make sure you know how to set up your gyro and then you do it correctly. This one, the leading edge is going to follow the tail pitch slider, so it's just like an align in that sense. But make sure you're paying attention to the leading edge. But when you put in left rudder, you want the tail pitch slider to go right. Right rudder, tail pitch slider go left. And when you push it to one side, you want the tail pitch slider to go to the opposite side that you're pushing it with the gyro. So there we go. We pretty much got this whole thing set together. Make sure you go through and check all the bolts and make sure everything's tight. Make sure you didn't miss anything, and that there's no holes that still need bolts in them. There's also the motor. Now that you have the main gear in place and the motor, you know how we were able to slide it forward and back. You're going to want to cut up just a little thin slice of paper and put it, can't find my paper, but cut a little slice of paper, put it in between here, and then push the motor in there, and then tighten the bolts. Get it nice and tight with that sheet of paper and pull it out, and it should have a bit of an accordion look to it. That's how you set the gear mesh and get it nice and tight, and screws nice and tight on that so that the motor and the gear mesh is perfect, and make sure everything's going the correct direction. So now we're about ready to almost fire it up. We just need to put the canopy together. The canopy is pretty simple, same setup as any other canopy. Really nice looking canamod here, but we've got to put these little grommets on here. That's always a bit of work. You just got to push it in there and then kind of keep going, push around, and pull it through, kind of work it through on the other end, and eventually you'll get that on there. And if you want, you can put some glue on there on it to hold it in place. It should be okay. I like to put a little oil on the inside so it goes on to the helicopter nice and smooth. So we're going to get the canopy done, put that on there, and then show you the final finished product. Alright, now we've got the canopy all set, and on here I had to move my receiver up a little bit. It was kind of getting in the way down here, so no problem, just shifted it up a little bit. I was still able to keep it on that bottom plate. Got these little grommets on here on the end, and put my blades on, little edge blades, little reflective stuff there, and we've got an Outrage Fusion 50 ready for a little test flight. Right, here we go. Bit of a more further back look of the Fusion 50. Pretty nice. Got the guitars, basses. Pretty nice little helicopter here. So just gotta take her out. Can't wait to see how she flies. You can do it just the trim just a little bit, but for the most part it's nice and smooth. Not bad.